If you've been following along in the build of this Jeep, you'll know that in one of the recent episodes here, I lost the ability to shift the transfer case into four-wheel drive through the shift lever because I lifted the transfer case real high up tight to the body and the factory shift linkages no longer worked. If you haven't seen that episode, I'll link it down below. But today, we're going to fix that problem. So what I've got right here are two examples of factory shift linkages for the four-wheel drive on these Jeeps. One's an early model, one's a late model. I'm pretty sure they're both interchangeable and they'll both fit in the same place. Either way, these things are pretty clunky and I don't think they really even work that great right from the factory. So any chance to eliminate it would be great. There's quite a few companies out there now making cable shifters, so it completely replaces this with a cable that runs straight between the shift handle and the transfer case. I did a little research on it and it sounds like the best one on the market right now is made by Savvy Off-Road. I think that one comes in at around $170. Number two seems to be made by Novak. The Savvy and the Novak are really similar, but I think the Savvy design has a few minor improvements over the Novak design. Either way, you can't go wrong. But unfortunately, those are pretty pricey, and I'm going to try not to pay that money by modifying one of these little monstrosities to work with our new situation. Now, if you haven't seen one of these things outside of a Jeep before, it can be a little odd to look at. So this part right up here would attach to the four-wheel drive shift lever inside the cab. So you pull the lever, it pivots on a pin, and then it will push this rod, which will then transfer through this lever here, and then that will in turn push this rod, which will shift the transfer case. So this end's attached to the transfer case, and this end is attached to the transfer case shift lever. Now, how does this whole thing stay in the Jeep? Well, we've got this bracket right here. What this bracket does is bolts right at the back of the transmission where the transmission meets the transfer case, uses the bolts that hold those two, the transfer case and the transmission together. That's what this thing mounts to. And the other side of this mounts to a little post on the bottom side of the body. Now the issue I ran into and why I can't use this anymore is I lifted up the drivetrain, but the body stayed in the same spot. So this whole rod just started bending down that way. And it was just bound up so bad that there's no way it was ever going to work. Unfortunately, as much as I'd love to go out and buy a nice cable shifter assembly from Savvy Off-Road, we are on a budget. So I'm going to try to make this thing functional with our new drivetrain setup. And what that's going to mean is making this sort of a standalone unit. So I'll base everything off the bracket that bolts to the transmission transfer case area and try to eliminate the part that attaches to the body. The biggest drawback to doing this is that this thing was a pain to remove because the nuts that hold this thing onto the transfer case were so tough to get to. It just took forever. It was just little micro turns at a time to get those things loose. And it's really because this bracket is so large. And that's where this thing comes in. Transfer case shifter linkage assembly V2.0. This I dug out of one of my spare parts bins. I've got a lot of spare Jeep parts sitting around. This I believe is off of a 2003 Wrangler, and it's basically the same thing. It serves the same purpose and bolts up just fine to where the old one did. But it's got this skeletonized bracket right here, and I think this is going to be a lot easier to work with because there's a lot more room to get a wrench in and test fit this thing. So there's going to be quite a bit of on and off getting this thing just right, and this is just going to speed up the process a lot for me. If I didn't have this one, I would definitely use the one that came off the Jeep, but since I have it and I think it's going to be more convenient, I'll just use this one. So what's the plan here? Well, I'm not really sure. To be honest, I never really have a plan too often. I just kind of start doing things and things come together as I keep going. So, like I said, I'm going to start off with knowing that this is going to be the base of the whole bracket. I would like to keep these pivot arms right here and probably one of these rods. So the first thing I notice is that these pivot arms are welded onto this rod right here. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this apart, zip that weld off, and see what we have to work with. So here's where we're at. We got the rod out, and there was a little collar that was pressed into this side. I ended up having to punch that out to get the rod out. But yeah, so the way I think we're going to get this to work is, so we get the bracket here. that bolts onto the transfer case transmission. I think we're going to put a bolt through here, stick a nut on the back side, then we'll have the rest of the bolt protruding out. This thing will slide over the bolt, and then maybe we'll put another jam nut or something in there, and we'll just leave enough gap for this thing to be able to pivot as it needs to, and I think that will work. Now that is a little hokey. I'm trying to do this without welding. I know a lot of guys don't have welders, so trying to see what I can do without a welder. Unfortunately, I didn't have the right size bolts on hand, so I had to run down to Tractor Supply and pick these up. That's where I usually buy hardware from. Cheapest place I've found, you buy it by the pound, so pretty good deal. The only problem with going there is that you usually walk out with some really expensive hardware. Just like that. The 2 angle grinders was originally 100 bucks, marked down to 75. How can you beat that? You can never have enough angle grinders, so good addition to the collection. Anyway, let's go ahead and get this thing fitted up here. And here's what we've got. So I just enlarged the hole in the bracket that mounts to the transmission transfer case connection. Got the bolt right here that replaced the pin that was in here. Got 2 nuts jammed up against the bracket, so that's holding the bolt steady. The bolt won't move around, and we just got the head of the bolt out here, which keeps the linkage section from falling off. And yeah, I mean, it's probably about a 32nd of an inch of play in here. That's probably how I'll set it up permanently, assuming this works. So next thing to do is go ahead and try to throw this thing in the Jeep and see how it fits. Why, for some reason, I decided I needed a grade 8 bolt for this, I haven't a clue, so we'll just leave it at that. So we got this thing all in place where it needs to be, fully bolted up. The brackets bolted to the transmission and transfer case bolts. We've got the arms all pressed into place where they need to be. One thing I don't like about this system is that these little plastic bushings where the rods connect onto the arms, and up here, down here, and up at the shifter, are that the plastic bushings kind of get destroyed as you push the arms on and off. So I may have problems with that down the road, but I'm not going to replace them for now. And one other thing you might notice is I added a second nut on the outside of this bracket because these rods weren't lining up quite right, so this whole assembly needed to be spaced out a little more, and that's what that's all about. So now I'm going to head up above and we'll see how this works. The thing that I'm concerned most about is this piece deflecting as the load's put on this. I know it's hard to see with the light, but that's the best I can get the light in there. But there's going to be a big moment arm here, basically, for how much this little bracket is meant to hold. So keep a close eye on that and let me know if it moves, because I'm not going to be able to see from up above. Well, that didn't work out too well, did it? I think we need to go back to the drawing board on this one. We made this little bracket here, and I'm hoping that by triangulating this corner we won't get as much deflection off of it. So we got a bolt that runs through to the where the linkage little thing rotates right here. That's still under the Jeep, and then this hole right here goes into one of the transfer case bolts, and obviously this is the other transfer case bolt. So I'm just going to trim this thing down, make it look a little nicer, and we'll see how it works. Refined triangulation bracket. Triangulated bracket installed. Now tell me if this is any better. So as you saw, that was still quite a bit of flex in the bracket. It felt a lot better on the shift handle, but I reviewed the footage and the bracket was still flexing quite a bit. So that triangulation piece definitely helped, but I went ahead and got out the hot glue gun and permanently mounted it on there. I was trying not to weld in this thing, but I think it really needed it to stiffen it up enough. So this is the final setup that we're going to go with. Got the bracket that mounts to the transmission and transfer case. That'll be back there like that. And then I took out one of those nuts in the middle and brought this thing closer to decrease the moment arm from where we're pushing on these levers. Then I ended up flipping these rods around a little bit. I can't remember which ones I flipped which way, but they're popped them out of the little retainer plastic things that are in here and flipped them around, flipped the retainers around, and made them line up a little bit better with where they need to go. So this is the one that goes to the transfer case, and then this one goes up to the shift handle. This little prong for the shift handle adjusts by loosening this bolt, and the thing slides back and forth. And I'm not sure if the camera will pick it up, but there's a flat side on it right here where the whole thing was kind of keyed to go onto the shaft from the factory. And I ended up needing to rotate this to have the little pin line up with the handle, so to rotate it around the rod. And to do that, I just drilled out the whole thing here and got rid of the keyed part on these components rather than trying to grind out a new keyway flat spot on the shaft. So with that, it's time to get some paint on this thing, and then we'll get to final install and you can see how it works. And here's the final product all painted up. We have the linkage that goes to the shift handle, the linkage that goes to the transfer case on the bottom here. And we've got the bolt going through the middle with a nut wedging the piece that bolts onto the transfer case against the bolt. So the bolt will stay in place and this whole assembly here will rotate around the bolt. And then of course we ended up having to weld the little triangulation brace here in place just to stiffen this up a little bit. I was looking at the original bracket that we had on the Jeep, the one that I chose not to use because it was so big and bulky. And if we had used this one instead, I don't think we would have needed any extra bracing because this thing is just so big and robust. So if I were to do it again, I probably would use this original bracket rather than the slimmed down version that we did use, but you know, we're all done at this point, so no sense in switching over. Now, after I got this all painted up, one thing that crossed my mind was there should probably be a grease fitting right here, since this is a moving part and it's going to be metal on metal. It would have been ideal to put that in before painting, but we didn't, so I'm just going to do that now. I'm going to drill a hole, tap it, and put a grease fitting in, then we'll get this thing installed. And that wraps up the saga of the transfer case shifter. It works pretty well. It actually shifts a lot smoother than the original one did when that was in place, so pretty happy about that. Is it as good as a cable system? No. Is it about $150 cheaper? Yes. So I'm pretty happy with it, and as long as it lasts, I'm going to keep it in there. Like I said, if I had used the original bracket from the original shifter, I don't think I would have needed to do any welding on this. Just that skimpier bracket needed some reinforcement, so definitely could have avoided welding, I think, but I wanted that skimpier bracket because it was easier to get a wrench in there. Hindsight, I would have definitely used the original one, but oh well, if I ever build another one, I'll know what to do then. So long story short, next thing we're going to take care of is the exhaust on here. That really needs to be done. Running an open header right now, and that's not okay, so I think that's what we'll do next time. So, all in all, this turned out to be a pretty cheap episode. Had more time invested in it than anything. Probably, I don't know, maybe 5, 6, 7 hours or so between all the fitting, painting, wire wheeling, everything, final install. But the actual cost, the dollars spent, we had a bolt and a couple nuts and a couple washers. It was $2.67 down at Tractor Supply. Like I said, I'm not really sure why I ended up buying a grade 8 bolt. Really, I just wasn't thinking at the time, and I should have bought a low-grade bolt. That would have done perfectly fine, and it would have been, I don't know, maybe $1 cheaper or so. But we went with a grade 8, and we're sure it will never break now. So what else did we have? We had some paint. I'll say $1.50, about a half a can of paint I used on that. And that brings our total for the episode up to $4.17, which is a heck of a lot cheaper than 150, 160, 170, whatever cable shifters cost. So, I'm pretty happy with the result. It's not as nice as a cable shifter. I do have a cable shifter in my other Jeep, and that thing is pretty sweet. But for $4.17, I will surely take this setup over a cable shifter. And that brings our new build total to $2,594.86. So, again, not a whole lot added in this episode, but we've got some pretty expensive stuff coming up, as I seem to keep saying. But yeah, stay tuned for that. Next thing, like I said, we're going to take care of the exhaust. I'm sure my neighbors are pretty tired of hearing me start this thing up with an open header, so that will surely be the next thing. As usual, thanks for watching. Appreciate you staying tuned. Always appreciate a thumbs up and a subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. And we'll see you in the next one.